Hello, brothers. My name is Doug Draper. I am a 1992 graduate from the University of Kansas, and I'd like to welcome you to season 5 of On the Banks. Again, On the Banks is a fraternity podcast where we meet brothers, we share stories, and embrace the shared values of Phi Gamma Delta, our great fraternity. Today's topic is going to be uber important. To be honest with you, of all of the discussions I've had in the last 4 seasons, this one really hit to my heart, and it's related because I have kids in the same demographic. And we're really going to talk about large language models and the impact on young men's mental health. And I am not the expert on this topic, but we do have the expert on the show with us today, Justin Carter, who is a North Alabama graduate from 2002. He's the assistant professor at North Alabama. And Justin, welcome. I'm so glad that you're on the show. I'm so glad that this topic is something that we're going to discuss.
Well, Doug, I appreciate you inviting me to join the podcast. I'm excited.
Yeah, cool. Well, before we get into our topic, we like to just learn more about our guest, right? And I see you got a Pergay license plate on your upper left, and I know that you have a family connection with the fraternity too. So maybe give us a little bit about your fraternity background and then also kind of your professional career.
Absolutely. So I am a professor at the University of North Alabama, but also an alumni or alumnus. I got my bachelor's, I got my MBA from UNA, and spent about 15 years working out in the real world as a consultant. Picked up another master's along the way, and then got my PhD, and came full circle. Came back to UNA to teach. So it was kind of like coming home. But my parents actually went to UNA. So, it's kind of family to me, but also my father was a Fiji while he was at the university. And so joining Phi Gamma Delta and being Greek was just part of the process. So
Yeah, that's great. Tell me about your journey in your professional career, right? I know that you weren't always in academia and you had some professional things that you did. So talk about that migration from kind of where you started to where you are now, and then we'll jump into our topic.
yeah, absolutely. So as far as my career, it kind of started in government contracting right out of college. And I got connected with a couple of different consultants who were working with us. So I took that transition kind of early on and worked for some of the big firms over the course of my career. But that's primarily what I've done is organization development, leadership development, and focusing more on the kind of the psychology of business.
Perfect. You couldn't have segued better into our topic there. So let's before we narrow down into the large language model, the LLM, like what drew you to focus on the science and the measurement of um, mental health and behavioral sciences and stuff? It's pretty unique, and you hear about it, but it's like, okay, I kind of know what that means. I kind of don't understand what that means. So talk about how you got interested in it, and then maybe just explain what that means to our audience.
Well, I've always had kind of a fascination with it, especially in school. I kind of had a unique view of, I was fascinated with leadership. I was fascinated with what made people, what made exceptional people. I didn't really, it's kind of weird. I didn't aspire to be one. I wanted to study them. I wanted to learn more about that. And I was almost obsessed with it. And when I got to my PhD program and I started my dissertation, one of the first things they do is they say, pick a problem. You gotta write a problem statement. And I thought that sounded horrible. I did not want to spend years of my life focused on what's wrong. And about the same time, the positive psychology movement had kind of started off, and it was picking up ground, and it really appealed to me. It was the whole idea that, just because the absence of disease doesn't mean you're healthy, that being healthy is something different. And when it comes to employees or it comes to leaders or it comes to people, that we need to stop focusing so much on what's wrong and trying to fix that, that we need to focus on the positive aspects of things. And so that kind of led me to this lifelong pursuit of, mental health, trying to understand it better and understand the good side of mental health.
I love that you used this diseased mindset, not the individual, but kind of our society, right? Hey, I don't have cancer. I'm not sick. I didn't get the flu this year. So, okay, you must be fine. Hey, good job. Keep on moving forward, right? And there's a lot more to health than just the physical body. So I love that you dove into that one. So the key part of our discussion today is really that mental health and that positive psychology that you spoke about and large language modeling, right? And um, before we jump into that and how they um, interact and how the implications they have with young males, just for our audience, right? Kind of describe what an LLM is, right? People have heard of all kinds of things that are LLMs, but maybe you could talk a little bit about it first of all, and then kind of how that's understand the mental health in young adults. So first and foremost, give us a high level view of what a large language model is.
Well, a large language model is basically built off kind of the predictive capability. So it's all predictive analytics. And it's looking at, okay, based on the text that you put in, what is the likely next word or next phrase or next sentence is going to follow that. So that's kind of the bare bones version of it. The sophistication that they've come up with now is mind blowing, but at a very kind of ground level, that's all you're doing is you're saying, okay, based on the words that were put in the prompt, what is the likely next chain of words that are going to follow that? Now, with large language models, there's different types, but I primarily focus on the ones that have chat capability. So it's not necessarily the probability of the next words, but also it's giving kind of a persona. So you're having a conversation. So it's not what are the next line of words, but what are the likely what likely will come from the conversation aspect of it. So if I say one thing, what's the likelihood, the probability that somebody would respond in a certain way? So that's how kind of large language models work, but also how chatbots work. And I primarily focus on what, like Chat GPT.
Yeah. No, you nailed it. Like I think when you talk about large language models, it's like, hey, Chat GPT, Anthropic, and all the ones that are out there. And trust me, I use it on pretty regular basis, right? And I've given myself a name and and they respond to me very human-like, right? And they get inferences and dry humor and comments and things like that. So I know that there's tremendous opportunities with large language models, and I'm sure there's been lots of a podcast about that. So that's not what we want to go into. We want to talk about kind of the risks, right? And helping to be aware of how large language models can impact mental health, specifically with young adults, and even more specifically with the members of our organization and young males, right? So talk about the awareness, right? Like this is powerful, it's creative, there's all kinds of cool stuff it can do. But oh my gosh, we got to be careful because here's how it can impact young males in society nowadays.
Yeah, it's interesting kind of taking that approach. Like I want to make it clear, I'm not opposed to these things at all. I use them every day. So I use Claude, I use ChatGPT on a regular basis. So I'm definitely not, I'm a huge fan. I think the opportunities and the possibilities of what we can do with them is amazing. I'm excited to see what happens, but it's that understanding that this is a double-edged sword. And early on, I remember I was at a conference a couple of years ago, and I was on a panel talking about AI. And this was right when ChatGPT kind of first came out. And we went around this panel discussion and they asked us, what are you most concerned about? And so we kind of go down the row and everybody's giving that general answer about bias and data sourcing and the monopoly of it and all those general things you typically hear when people push back against large language models. But they got to me and I said, honestly, the impact on young men is what kind of worries me. And people actually laughed at that time. They thought I was kidding or joking that that's what I was concerned about, but it really is what keeps me up at night. I'm a father. I'm a person that generally just cares about people, and it's a big concern of mine.
Yeah. So what do you think specifically about men that are more susceptible, right? Because there's all kinds of social media out there, and there's women that use ChatGPT and engage with large language models. But you and I were speaking beforehand that it seems that men are more susceptible than women, and maybe you could talk a little bit about why that is.
There are so many reasons. One particularly, and this is something I've been focused on quite a bit, is young men today are in such a unique position that they've never been in before. The world when I was young and I was starting out is much different than it is today. So you are less likely, if you're a young man today, you're less likely to graduate from high school than you were 10 years ago. Men account for only about 40% of college students now, which has never happened before. There are less men in typically male-dominated roles like engineering and other things, and they're not as engaged. And that's very concerning. One of the biggest statistics that to me just solidifies that we're in a crisis right now with young men is that 80% of suicides in the United States are men. And the vast majority of those are under 25 years old. Like that's staggering. And it's because of several factors, but one big factor is the fact that men typically don't have a big social network. They don't have friends. So 10 years ago, on average, the average male had 3 to 4 friends. Now it's down to 2 or 3 friends. And so young men are socially isolated. They're broke. I mean, you're starting out in your career, they're lonely and they're unmotivated. Some of that's because of societal pressure, being constantly told you're the problem and you're bad. And other facets are, men just aren't trained to reach out and talk to people and to seek help.
Uh, yeah, it's the young men, they're trying to have a facsimile of life on a screen through an algorithm, right? I heard that say on a podcast once, and I'm like, that just resonates. Those are like 5 words that just nail it. I want to dive in more a little bit about about that topic, but I know that women are impacted as well, but that was more on the social media side. Maybe you could just speak for a minute or so on, hey, women are impacted as well, but kind of in a different technology platform.
Yeah, it's actually, I mean, when you think about it, it kind of makes sense that when we looked at and one of the reasons why I was so adamant about pushing this early on and I'm still very passionate about this is because we learned this lesson with social media. But social media was more, women were more impacted by it than men. But when you look at what social media did for our mental health, it was more of that status. It was more of that comparing yourself to other people. It was a different dynamic at play there. But also it was that, we went through this for 10 years before anybody actually stood up and said, hey, maybe this is unhealthy to some degree. And I don't want that to be the case here. But when we look at using a large language model or using some kind of chat function for that social interaction, then, if we look at the differences between men and women, men are much more susceptible to that. They don't have the network. They don't have the skills that women have. Women are much more social than men. And that's been proven. I mean, there's plenty of studies that validate that women typically, whether it's going through a breakup, whether it's losing a job, whether it's going through rough periods of time, they are much more skilled at getting their peers together, getting their friends together, reaching out for help, getting therapy, getting support from that through social channels. Men don't have those channels typically. And so that makes young men particularly it's tempting to say, well, I can use this as a way to have a social connection with something. And I understand that, but there's also a lot of danger there. One of the things is, it's that instant gratification, that always having something available 24/7, unrealistic expectations of what a relationship would be. I mean, there's just so many dynamics that we can dive into that make this very troubling.
Yeah, you kind of touched on it a second there, kind of about the dopamine and serotonin. You and I beforehand spoke a little bit about that, and I thought it was real fascinating. You get a great analogy with kind of fast food, and then you and I just kind of went off on all kinds of other things like that. So talk about the dopamine and serotonin, and kind of get a little uh, um, deeper into how that plays a role.
Yeah, so what we're seeing is, and I think the analogy of fast food is perfect. We're seeing, especially young men, using these chatbots and using things like character AI, and there's some other platforms for kind of the fast food version of a relationship, whether it's friendship, whether it's companionship, in a couple of situations, romantic relationships. And as far-fetched as that sounds, like it's happening more and more, where people are looking for that fast food version by creating these characters or creating these personas and using them for, people use it for therapy, people use it for counseling, coaching. People are starting to form relationships. And the problem with that is it does give you that dopamine. It gives you that instant gratification, that instant hit of validation, of connection, of all those things, but it doesn't give you that long term. You don't develop serotonin from that type of interaction. Serotonin is developed when we form intimate relation, close connection with people, when we have physical touch, when you hug somebody, when you have that bond. And so what you're doing is you're running out, you're getting the fast food, it's giving you that instant gratification, but long-term health-wise, we're starting to see, in the research that we're doing is showing that it's actually detrimental. We just finished up a study and just submitted it last week, where we looked at just using ChatGPT to do something like an assignment, and what's the impact of that. And it turned out that negative effect, like negative emotions, really didn't get impacted that much, but it was positive emotions that actually decreased because you weren't actually doing it. You weren't actually doing the work, and so you didn't get the gratification from it. So there's so much that we're messing with here that I don't think we're talking about, that I don't think we're exploring, that needs to be discussed.
Yeah. Yeah, just beyond a large language model, right? So kids in this era, and I've been involved with my chapter in the last couple of years, but I'll tell you two things that are really prevalent is Robinhood, where everybody thinks they can make $1 million because listening to something online, or a recommendation from ChatGPT or a large language model. And the other one's DraftKings, right? They've gamified, both of those have gamified. The gamification, I think, is a term I've used or heard before. That is just dopamine hit, dopamine hit, dopamine hit, right? And it is scary. I see it, right? I see it with some of the brothers, to be honest with you. And I would say that I know anybody listening to the show, I can turn every single person that's under the age of 25 into a millionaire, guaranteed. It's going to take time. It's going to take discipline and time, not on DraftKings and not on Robinhood, but that is what is prevalent nowadays.
So
So
let's,
yeah, go please.
if I could just jump in
Yeah.
and kind of expand on that. I mean, that's really the crux of this is we're at a point now where we're losing the ability to have that patience, to put in that time, to invest. When we think about long-term relationships and strong bonds, that requires work. It requires a long-term commitment. Like, friendship, really strong friendships, really strong bonds, they don't happen overnight. You can't, create a couple of prompts and get that. And we're missing out on that because again, we're going to the fast food. And I'm really worried that this is going to become more and more prevalent, that people are going to they're going to stop reaching out to friends. They're going to stop reaching out to peers. They're going to stop forming those relations, not completely, but I'm saying we're going to get dependent on, I've got a problem, I'm going to get on ChatGPT and I'm going to talk about it versus, I'm going to meet a friend for a beer after work and connect with somebody. And that's part of it. The other part of it is, I'm worried about the young men that are just maybe a little socially awkward, maybe don't have the natural charisma to be able to, go out and meet people, and they're a little shy. And I think those people are the ones I'm most worried about, because it's personal growth and development to put yourself out of your comfort zone and to be challenged in those scenarios and to learn those things. And if we give them an easy out, I don't know what the long-term consequences of that are. I don't want to think about what the long-term consequences are.
Yeah. Well, this is a fraternity podcast for Phi Gamma Delta, and certainly Phi Gamma Delta is not the panacea, if that's the right word, to fix all these problems, right? But what you're describing, the loneliness, isolation, and things, the fraternity can definitely provide some value. One comment, I was just talking to our chapter a couple of weeks ago, and there was a new member that was a sophomore, and he specifically said his first year he felt isolated. He spent a lot of time in the dorms. He spent a lot of time just by himself, and transitioning into the fraternity as a Phi Gamma Delta in his sophomore year, the world opened up to him, and he's now involved with campus activities. He said he's happier than he's ever been, and so we are here to educate our listeners and talk about the fraternity, and it is a real viable way to kind of break people out of their shell. That's a tangent, Justin. I went on a tangent there, but here's my next question. You can't stop progress. You can't stop innovation, right? I mean, things are going to continue to grow. So how do we stay aware of this and the impacts, right? So our listeners are like, I get it. I see it. I agree. What do we do? How is it just an awareness? Is it, here's 3 things we need to do? I don't know. Like what, now that we have this awareness, what's the plan? Because it's not going to slow down.
And it's really, it's not hard. Like I think part of it's awareness, but any problem I've had in my life or any situation I've run up to, I'm a big fan of the Stoics, and I always love going back to kind of their writings and what they said, because you'd be hard pressed to find something they didn't talk about or didn't cover, and they covered this. Do everything you do with intention. Have an intention. Think about why are you doing what you're doing. And so when you think about that, if you're going to ChatGPT or you're going to Claude or you're using whatever, there are certain times where it's going to make a lot of sense that you're just going to want it to do it for you. Like, I'm going to put in a prompt, it's going to give me an answer, and I'm done. There are going to be times where you want to partner with it, that you're going to want to work together, and there are going to be situations it's best to do on your own. And when we start talking about the social aspects of things, those are things, in my opinion, we need to be doing on our own. We don't need to look for these things for any type of, companionship, or I think that's dangerous. That's when we start getting into dangerous territory.
Mhm.
Also, challenge is really good. The Stoics talked about that quite a bit. It was one of their five virtues, this idea of courage, the idea of being challenged. It's fine to lean on these things and get help and assistance from these things, but don't let it take away all the challenge in your life. And that's with AI in general. One of the big pushbacks I have against AI is, I am a little bit concerned about automating too much of our lives. There's something to be said for, I want to do this. I could use a tool and make it easier. That doesn't mean I have to. And it doesn't mean that's the best thing for me. Sometimes the best thing for me is just to struggle for the sake of struggling,
Mhm.
for the sake of being challenged, for just doing something difficult. We go back to dopamine and serotonin. Like, that's how you develop confidence. That's how you develop self-efficacy. That's how you develop resilience. And if you don't challenge yourself on a regular basis, you're not going to grow. You're not going to develop. So I worry that we're going to get too dependent on these things to do everything for us. And it's going to create a bunch of, almost a laziness. And, the Stoics also talked about temperance, having discipline. And the only way you develop discipline is by going and doing hard things.
Yeah. The reward, the journey is the reward in some instances, right? And I love the fact that that needs to be kept and maintained. When you and I were talking, and you like the Stoics, I've heard the term. Like, give us a couple of names. So if people are like, yeah, I like that, I want to go read about the Stoics. Who are some specific people that you would suggest that our listeners could not reach out to because they're no longer around, but grab some of their writings and learn more?
Well, a great place to start is, if you remember, they just came out the second one, but if you've watched the original Gladiator, at the very beginning of the movie, they're sitting in the Colosseum, and there's this older man, with this long gray hair, Marcus Aurelius. And Marcus Aurelius was probably one of the most popular or well-known Stoics. He wrote a book called Meditations, and it's a great read. He didn't intend to write a book, never intended it to be a book. You're actually reading his journal and letters and notes and things that he wanted to remember that he wrote to himself. And so that's a great place to start. Epictetus is also, one of my favorites. There are several. Also, God, I'm trying to think of his name. Hold on. Ryan Holiday is a great person to follow on social media. He wrote a book, The Daily Stoic, that's just a great book. I actually have it here somewhere, and I every year I buy his journal, and it's a year-long journal. And every day you get a little prompt and you write a little reflection on it. That's a great place to start. So I'm a huge fan. I've read a lot and studied them quite a bit, because again, there's, whether it's parenting, whether it's being married, whether it's having a job, whether it's navigating friendships or whatever, that you can find uh, pretty good life lessons with the Stoics.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing that. So, I'd like to end the conversations with, a handful of questions, right? Kind of the fast five conclusion of a question. So you don't have to answer these in like 5 seconds, right? I'm just saying that we'll go through some questions here. But what's been the most challenging part of your research on this topic?
The most challenging aspect is just Fighting the urgency of it. Like I want to get out there. I want to share this message, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to do so. But it's also frustrating that, when you go on LinkedIn or you go on uh, social media in any aspect, and you see people posting a lot of misleading and bad advice,
Mm.
and you want to scream at everyone and say, nobody wins a fight on social media, but you want to like scream at everybody and go, no, this is not a good way to use this. There's so many good ways to use this. This is don't promote this. Um, that's probably the most frustrating thing.
Gotcha. So on the other side, what's been the most rewarding or proud moment of your research, right?
I would say I'm most proud about the fact that the stuff that I've worked on and the things that I've done are practical. No offense against any of the theorists out there or people that do that type of work, but I've always really been proud of the fact that I do, tangible things that can be implemented that people can use to better their lives, and that means a lot to me.
I Same here. I love the tangible nature. You can talk about it, and that's why when I asked about the Stoics, you had two perfect examples. I love the Gladiator, and then Ryan, who wrote that book. That's I'm with you, right? The tangible nature of what we're talking about. So, yeah. Did you? Is there any individuals or any stories that have helped you with your research? Like, hey, I met this individual that helped me go this course in my research, or here's something that I did and somebody really responded to it. Anything of that nature?
I'll tell you the story real quick. I remember this really well. This is probably the most impactful thing that's happened to me as a researcher, because you don't get a lot of, recognition or praise or anything. But um, I was going to work and I checked my phone, and I'm on LinkedIn a little bit, but I'm not, by any means like an influencer or have, some huge following or anything. So usually I'll get a couple of notifications, but this day I'm going to work and I check my phone and I have like 500 notifications from LinkedIn, and what in the world is going on? Like, this is crazy. So I go to my LinkedIn profile and I look at it, and Dow Chemical Company had actually posted, they were getting ready for like a corporate retreat with their employees. So they had posted this little, they had quoted me and gave a link to one of the talks I gave, and all these people were kind of engaging with it, making comments about it, and talking about it. And it was just one of those moments. Like I I teared up. Like I was like, it was like that recognition of like, okay, this is having an impact. And again, it's that practical, the fact that a company is like, they wanted their employees to hear that message was really like that meant a lot to me.
Yeah. Yeah, not for the applause of men, and that story is not because of you. It's because of your research and the thoughtfulness that you're bringing to the topic, and that's cool. I don't. I've never had that experience happen to me where that many people have identified what this person is saying and the research they're doing is valuable in this day and age. So that's a really cool story. That's awesome.
Oh, it was like I said, I got emotional. I like called my mom and I was like, you're never gonna believe what happened. It's so
I
cool.
love it. That's great. Cool. Well, hey, as far as the fraternity goes, what are some things in Phi Gamma Delta and your time at North Alabama that kind of helped you get started, or some things that you've learned in your undergraduate career, and also being a sire and son, right? That helped you with your research and your trajectory.
I think for me, the biggest thing I got out of it, it kind of goes back to where we started at the very beginning, that idea of brotherhood. And that's something that I've carried with me. I still have, actually, before we jumped on this podcast, every Friday I have a group of men that I meet with, and we talk about life, we talk about business, we talk about challenges that we're having, and just that aspect of brotherhood and coming together with a group of like-minded, motivated, driven individuals. That's Fiji started that for me. and solidified how important that is in my life. And that is something I've tried to replicate and tried to do throughout my life. And so I'm very thankful and very fortunate that I was surrounded by some great people early on, because I actually went through like a really difficult time in college. And I got in an accident and had some medical things going on, and really struggled for a semester. And I don't know if I'd have finished college if it wasn't for my brothers and rallying around me and supporting me. And so, I'm really thankful. Brotherhood's not just about the bad times, it makes the good times better. But there's just so much to that it's really important for young men, any man, to try to form friendships and try to have that. So I think that's definitely the reason why I've had the success I've had.
Great. Well, we like to end the show with this one final question, right? So, with all your experiences, right? If you could go back and talk to your 20-year-old FIGAM self, right? What advice would you give yourself?
All right, so you told me this was going to be a question, so I did
Yeah.
prep for this one a little bit, but and I thought about it. It's a hard question to answer, because I'm extremely happy where I am. So there's almost this part of me that's like the butterfly effect. Like, I don't want to change the timeline. If I went back and gave myself advice, like, I don't want to alter anything that's happened, but I was like, okay, if I could go back and talk to me, what would I do? And the thing that kept coming up, and I don't want to say it's a regret, because again, it led me to where I am today, but I would really focus more on developing friendships in the time I had in the fraternity. And, I was surrounded by so many great people, so many, wonderful guys that I could have learned from, and I could have spent more time with. And I took that for granted. I was young, I was kind of immature. I didn't realize what I had in front of me. And I really wish I could go back and invest more time with them and focus on building those relationships deeper than what I did. Because, I chased girls and cared about other things, and really didn't realize the opportunity that I was given. And I wish I could go back. I don't want to say I regret anything, but I wish I could go back and say, hey, like, you've got this amazing opportunity. Take advantage, go hang out with your brothers, go spend time with them, build those friendships, build those relationships. And that's definitely the advice that I would give myself.
Well, I'd say that's pretty rock solid advice, right? Those are some amazing, the 4 years that you spent in college. I don't think you'll be that close or around that many of your close friends ever again. So I love the fact to be aware, be cognizant of it, and engage.
Yeah, you take it for granted. And you should be, for the members right now, like, you've been given a gift, and don't overlook that. Like, you've got an amazing opportunity. And like I said, research shows most people have 1 to 2 friends. And that's even getting rarer now. So the fact that you are surrounded by a group of men is an amazing thing that you should be thankful for every day.
Justin, that is a perfect way to end this discussion. I mean, you nailed it. That last sentence that you said is so powerful, and I can't thank you for joining us. So again, Justin Carter, North Alabama O2 graduate. He's an assistant professor at North Alabama, and he's a sire and son just like I am. And so that's very important. So Justin, I can't thank you enough for being on the show today. It's been very insightful. And as you and I both spoke about, hugely important topic. And I'm so glad that you were able to come on the show and talk about it.
Well, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk about this, because I do think it's critical that we have these conversations.
Great. And I'd also like to thank everybody for joining us today on the Banks. We look forward to seeing you again next time, where we're going to meet new brothers We're going to share stories and learn more about the values of our fraternity, Phi Gamma Delta. So until next time, I'm mighty proud to be a Fiji.